Those people who are watching, remember that if you have any questions, you can type them in the box on the side of your screen, and I'll be looking there to see if there are any questions. This is the last class of the 4-part series on Ruth Calderon's book, A Bride for One Night. And we're going to be discussing the story tonight that is on page 123 in that book, simply titled Elisha. So let me preface the story. I trust that people read it, and if not, I'm going to be reading the story that's here on page 123. So I guess let's start with that. Let me start by sharing that story, and then there's a lot to be said about this story. Rabbi Meir was preaching in the study house in Tiberias. His teacher Elisha rode past on his horse on the Sabbath. Okay, so there are a lot of things that I'm going to say about this story. So just keep these things in mind. Keep in mind that there's a study house in Tiberias. Anybody who's been in Israel today, Tiberias not exactly coming to mind for an association for a yeshiva. Okay, Elisha riding on a horse on Shabbat. They came and said to Rabbi Meir, "Your rabbi is outside." He stopped and went out to him. He, Elisha, said to him, to Rabbi Meir, "What were you teaching today?" He, Rabbi Meir, said to Elisha, "And the Lord blessed the latter years of Job's life more than the former." He said to him, "And with what verse did you introduce your teaching?" He said to him, "And the Lord gave Job twice what he had before," meaning that he doubled his wealth. He said to him, "Enough, Meir, we have come to the boundary beyond which it is forbidden to travel on the Sabbath." Rabbi Meir said to him, "How do you know that?" Elisha said to him, "From the steps of my horse, which I counted as it trotted for a distance of 2,000 cubits. Meir said to him, "You have all this knowledge in you, yet you still do not want to repent from your heresy?" He said to him, "I cannot." He said to him, "Why?" He said to him, "Because once I was passing by the Holy of Holies on my horse on the Day of Atonement, which fell on the Sabbath. I heard a still small voice coming out of the Holy of Holies and saying, 'Return, my wayward sons,' except for Elisha ben Abuya, who recognized my power and turned against me." End of story. Okay, so a few things about this story. And first of all, Rabbi Meir is the preeminent teacher from the time of the Mishnah. So we have to remember, Judaism today is based on Torah. And by Torah, I mean by extension the whole Bible, but basically the Torah and the rabbinic interpretation of the Torah. Okay, so to anybody who is Jewish today, no matter what denomination they are, is a combination of Torah and rabbinic interpretation. And just to be easier, conservative Judaism, absolutely Torah and rabbinic interpretation of the Torah. So the first collection of rabbinic interpretation of the Torah is known as the Mishnah, and it covers a period of time of 100 BCE to 200 CE. So Rabbi Meir is the preeminent teacher in the Mishnah. Most anonymous sayings found in this 6-volume work are of the school of Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir's student is the editor of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, is from the school of Rabbi Meir. So it would make sense then that anonymous teachings in the Mishnah come from Rabbi Meir. So this Rabbi Meir in this story is an important person. Okay? So the preeminent teacher of the time. Now, we also have to know that Tiberias at the time was a major center of Jewish life in the land of Israel. Okay, now we would think that Jerusalem would be the center of Jewish life in the land of Israel. But we have to remember this is 100 or so years after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Temple's destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. Jews aren't living in Jerusalem anymore because the whole center of life has been destroyed. So you'll excuse me, I'm going to have to take some sips of water, getting over a cold. So they leave Jerusalem, they have to go other places. And one famous story during the time of the destruction of the temple and the Roman period at that time were some rabbis trying to convince the Romans to let them out of Jerusalem and let them set up a yeshiva in Yavne. And Yavne is inland between Ashkelon and Ashdod. If anybody knows that geography of Israel today. So what is southwestern Israel? That's where the yeshiva, that's where the Rabbinical Academy left Jerusalem and was established in Yavne, so that when the temple was destroyed, Judaism was not destroyed in the process. From Yavne, the main academy moved to northern Israel. It was in Caesarea, in Caesarea on the coast, and it was also in Tiberias, and it was also in a town called Tzipori, which, if you've been to Israel, has a beautiful archaeological discoveries have been found there. Beautiful mosaics have been found in buildings that were uncovered by archaeologists. So I'm trying to remember maybe, Ira, you were there in one of the tours of Israel that we did. So the town of Tzipori was a major center of Jewish life from the time of the Mishnah, around this time that the story takes place. So there are synagogues there, and there are Romans living there. So there are beautiful Roman villas that have been unearthed with beautiful mosaics on the floor. And some of and the mosaics from the Cardo, the main street of the town, and some of the main buildings that were there, and the mosaics that were in the synagogues there. Beautiful, beautiful mosaics in this town of Tzipori, which is up in the hills above Tiberias in the Galilee, in that region. So what rabbis would do in that time period and through the Middle Ages into modern times in a shtetl, you'd have itinerant rabbis, preachers, teachers who would go from town to town, from one Shabbos to the next, being the guest speaker in town, and sometimes schnorring also for their yeshiva. That's what rabbis would do. And you would have that as well. It happens today in the ultra-Orthodox community. If you get the New York Times, and the New York Times Magazine a couple of weeks ago had a photo article spread about Lakewood, New Jersey, and the schnorrers, and schnorrer is Yiddish for beggars, and I don't say it in a derogatory way, but it's part and parcel of the ultra-Orthodox community that people would be coming from non-profit charitable institutions in Israel to America to raise funds. And what they would do is go, you have it, they haven't come, well, they do come to Olney, but they haven't come to my door. They haven't found me yet, even though I've been living here for 8 years. They used to, they still come to Silver Spring, but they didn't come to my door there. But they did come to Sharei Tefillah. They came into the building in Sharei Tefillah asking for money there, but they haven't come into our new building here in Olney yet. So now if they're watching this video, they'll know to come. But anyway, but it just maintains the tradition. For that is from this. So Rabbi Meir, I'm not sure where he lived. I didn't check. I don't think he lived in Tiberias. But it would not have been unusual for him to have spent Shabbos in Tiberias to teach. Okay, so that's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is known also for his wife, whose name was Bruria. So Bruria is one of the few women that we hear about in the time of the Mishnah, and she was a knowledgeable woman and remarkably, the Talmud tells stories of Bruria herself and her knowledge and how she teaches her husband something. There's a famous tragic story that Rabbi Meir and Bruria had twins. And the twins die during the day of Shabbat. And she doesn't go, and he's out at the synagogue. And she doesn't go and get him. He comes home, does Havdalah, and says, "Where are the boys?" And she teaches a verse from the Bible saying that our deposit has been returned to the creditor, which is teaching her husband the boys are dead. So that's a famous story of Bruria. There are other stories of Bruria as well. So that there's an Orthodox yeshiva in Jerusalem called Michlelet Bruria, the Bruria School, where there are these gap year programs post-high school, where a lot of American Orthodox yeshiva students go to study in Israel for a year. So the preeminent girls' yeshiva is named for Rabbi Meir's wife. So that's Rabbi Meir, a very important person. Okay, now his teacher is this man Elisha, who is riding on a horse on Shabbat. Okay, you don't have to know much about Jewish law to know that that's not right. Okay, and that in fact, according to Jewish law, he should be struck down by God for violating the Sabbath. Okay? So there are two violations that Elisha is doing by riding the horse on Shabbat. Number one is violating law of traveling, and number two, violating the law that his horse is supposed to rest on Shabbat. Okay? So our animals are supposed to rest on Shabbat. The only work you can do for an animal is if it's a female milking animal. You do have to milk the cow on Shabbat for tsa'ar ba'alei chayim, for easing the burden or suffering of an animal. So absolutely, you gotta milk a cow on Shabbat. But you cannot ride a horse on Shabbat because that is unnecessarily working the animal, and the animal's entitled to a day of rest as well. So he's violating two laws, plus other things like not being in shul on Shabbat. Okay, he's riding his horse. So now, of course, the question is, how is this man Rabbi Meir's teacher? Why would Rabbi Meir choose a teacher, Rabbi Meir, who is the Mishnah? Why would the Mishnah, embodied in Rabbi Meir, why would the Mishnah have a teacher who violates the Mishnah? That is a question we should be thinking about when he's introduced just nonchalantly that Elisha's riding his horse on Shabbat, he's outside. And not only, okay, so maybe he's his private teacher. Ooh, I don't want my students to know. I don't want anybody to know. I see this guy Elisha. He violates Shabbos, which probably means he violates other things too. Probably violates kashrut and other things. I don't want people to know. People know. His students know. Your rabbi is outside on his horse waiting for you. And it's just nonchalantly like that. That's totally fine. That his students don't care. So that's fascinating too. Okay, now the details of the story and how more bizarre this is. Okay, so as they're traveling along, Meir is teaching Elisha, sharing with Elisha the sermon that he just shared in shul. Okay, which is common for rabbis to do because so last Shabbat was my niece's bat mitzvah in Queens, and I had the privilege with my family of staying in the rabbi's house in Queens, Rabbi Jerry Skolnick. A shout out to Rabbi Jerry Skolnick, a past president of the Rabbinical Assembly. So I stayed in his house. So what do? We talk rabbi things. So that's what Rabbi Meir and Elisha were doing. They're talking rabbi things. So, what'd you teach in shul today? What'd you preach about? Okay, kind of like testing a student. Oh, so now Elisha is not critiquing the sermon, but he's just saying, all he says at the end is, oh, we got to stop here. Okay, so the man on the horse, who by riding the horse shouldn't care about Shabbat, because obviously he doesn't care about Shabbat, does care about Shabbat because he's counting the cubits to know what the limit is. Okay, so 2,000 cubits is as far as you can walk outside of a town on Shabbat. Okay, now, that's hard to do today because you can walk in town 2,000 cubits and still be in town. So that's okay, but once you leave the town, you can't walk outside of town for 2,000 cubits. So it's a hard thing to do on Shabbos today to have to worry about that. But it's not so hard back then when population of the world was smaller and villages were smaller and Tiberias was smaller. So if you drive into Tiberias today, the bus driver or the tour guide will point out where the ancient synagogue was, where Rambam, Maimonides, is buried, where Rabbi Meir is buried, and other rabbis are there. So there are these ancient stone buildings on the southern approach to Tiberias. That was the town of Tiberias, not where the hotels are today, and not where you can get on the boat to ride on the Kinneret and the other hotels are. That's not ancient Tiberias. Ancient Tiberias is these old stone buildings, and it's not hard to walk out of town on Shabbat then, because it wasn't that big of a town. But for that era, it was a big town, named after Caesar. Anyway, so Elisha, who publicly is not caring about Shabbat, is still caring about Shabbat enough for his student, because he doesn't want his student to be violating Shabbat. So he's counting the cubits as he's riding his horse, as the horse is trotting along. Okay? So that's one thing. The other thing about this story is that it just nonchalantly introduced to Elisha's heresy. What does that mean? So obviously there's heresy because he's riding a horse on Shabbat, but it's clear that there must have been some other reason for that. What prompted the heresy? So we don't know that from this story, and I'll share that with you from the other story. It's in a footnote, which I didn't print out the footnote page for this story for you to see. But then the kicker is, Meir asks Elisha, why don't you return to the fold? If you're already thinking about the 2,000 cubits, there's something Jewish left in you. Why don't you come back and let's make you Jewish and it's okay. No harm done. Now Elisha says, I can't. Why? Because he's riding a horse. He tells a story of riding a horse on Shabbos, which was also Yom Kippur. Like this year. Yom Kippur was on Shabbat. So not only is he riding a horse on Shabbos, he rides on Yom Kippur. Okay, that's the ultimate heresy, which is interesting. Maybe the word apikoros, which is a Greek word for which it was adopted into Hebrew for a heretic. Apikoros, Yom Kippur, some similar letters there. I don't know. Probably nothing linguistic connected there, but it's just interesting. So he's riding a horse on Yom Kippur on Shabbos. So here's the thing. He hears God speak. How many of us hear God speak? None of us have heard God speak. Okay, I'm sorry. It's possible we've heard God speak to us. But it's possible we might not want to admit it because people might look at us funny if we say we just heard God speak to us. Okay, there could be moments where we feel as if God has spoken to us, and we can all admit that. We feel moments of spirituality, but you actually hear God talk to you and say, Jonah, do the following. Now, I have not heard God speak. So now, other clergy in other religions become clergy because there is a calling. No. In Judaism, it doesn't work that way. You don't have to prove. There's no admission interview in which what was your calling. It's not Jewish language to become a rabbi, to have a calling like that. It's Christian language. It's not Jewish language. So not to say that we deny the possibility of being called to do something. It's just not a Jewish way to understand it. But be that as it may, Elisha describes how on that Yom Kippur that he's riding a horse, and it's also Shabbos, that he hears God's voice speak to him, a still small voice, which is that phrase, a still small voice, is what the biblical Elisha's teacher Elijah hears speak to him. Elijah, the prophet who we sing about every Saturday night after Havdalah, and when we open the door for Elijah at the Seder. So that Elijah, stories about him, he hears a still small voice of God speaking to him. So that phrase, a still small voice, repeats throughout the Talmud as a common way to refer to hearing God speak to you, this still small voice. So he hears this still small voice coming out of the Kodesh Kodeshim. Okay, so now we have to picture this. Let's imagine that this room is the Temple Mount. Okay? So the ark behind me is the Holy of Holies. You can't be on the Temple Mount on a horse. Okay? There's no way you could be on the Temple Mount on a horse, because only pure creatures can be on the Temple Mount. And a horse is not a pure creature. Right? You can't eat a horse. It's not kosher to eat a horse. So any unkosher animal cannot be on the Temple Mount. So he's far away. He has to be far away. By definition of this story, if he's on a horse on Yom Kippur and he hears this still small voice coming out of the ark, he has to have pretty good hearing. Because that would mean, so if this room is the temple, he's at Emory Drive, at the traffic light. That's where he can be. That's the closest he can be on his horse, without having to get off and purify himself to get into any closer to the temple. Okay? But he hears the voice come out of the Holy of Holies and says to him, that voice is saying, return, wayward people. Okay? Return. The word there for return is the word for teshuvah. Okay? So that's what you're supposed to do on Yom Kippur, is repent. Repent, wayward sons, except Elisha ben Abuya. Okay, so that's not the irony, but the contradiction of the stories. He's riding a horse on Shabbos, studying with his student. He's riding his horse on Shabbos, counting the 2,000 cubits. He's riding his horse on Yom Kippur, but he hears God speak to him. So who is this Elisha ben Abuya character? Okay, so the classic story about Elisha ben Abuya is told in a historical novel called As a Driven Leaf. So you may have heard of this novel. It was reprinted a couple years ago. This is an old printing, because on the inside it has my name and my class at Akiba Hebrew Academy in Philadelphia, my 10th grade class when I read this. So 10th grade, 1978 is when I read this story for the first time. So I'm into historical fiction, and this is really the first Jewish historical novel that I've ever read, and probably the source by James Michener is another book I read around the same time. So I'm a history major in college. I love history, and I especially love historical fiction, which kind of brings history to life. So Rabbi Milton Steinberg, may he rest in peace, was a conservative rabbi, was the rabbi of the Park Avenue Synagogue, and died tragically at a young age of a heart attack. But he was a preeminent preacher in the Jewish community, and quite the leader of the Jewish community as well. And he wrote this book while serving as rabbi of that congregation, based on the character of Elisha ben Abuya, which is all about how we handle problems and challenges to our religious sensibilities. So the classic story of Elisha ben Abuya is that the rabbis are coming out of the rabbinical academy, and they see a boy climbing a tree. His father is at the foot of the tree. So the father's at the base of the tree telling his son to go climb the tree because there's a nest up there, and to get the eggs from the nest and bring them back down. Okay? Nothing wrong with that, except the mother bird is in the nest. And like a good Jew, they know the verse from the Torah that says, if you want the eggs in the nest and the mother bird is sitting in the nest, you have to drive away the mother bird in order to get the eggs. And if you do that, you will merit a long life. One of two commandments in the Torah in which the reward is given. The other commandment, anybody know what the other one has a reward for? Honor your mother and father. Okay? Honor your mother and father, written as the fifth commandment of the Ten Commandments, says, Lama'an ya'arichun yamecha al ha'adamah, so that your days will be lengthened on this earth. Same reason given, same reward given if you drive away the mother bird from the nest to take the eggs, so that you will merit a long life. So the boy drives away the mother bird. He was taught well by his father. He takes the eggs, and this story that's in the footnote has a snake biting him and dying of snake poison, or he falls off the branch and dies. Okay, now, that should be a problem. All the rabbis are outside the yeshiva. The day has come to an end, and they see this happen, and that should, whoa, that's not what the Torah says. If you drive away the mother bird, you're supposed to live a long time. Why is this boy dying for fulfilling a mitzvah? So that's too much for Elisha ben Abuya. He becomes a heretic. Okay? So the whole book, As a Driven Leaf, is about Elisha ben Abuya dealing with a literal reading and a literal understanding of Torah, and what happens when reality goes against what the Torah says should happen in real life. And that what it means then to come up with some other kind of way for reconciling religion with real life. Okay? So the Talmud, once this event happens and Elisha ben Abuya becomes a heretic, he's then is referred to as Acher, the other one. So, which is interesting in that the Talmud doesn't erase Elisha ben Abuya from the Talmud, because his teachings are still important teachings. And in fact, there's another story of 4 rabbis going up to heaven and then coming back. And this is another basis for Elisha ben Abuya becoming a heretic. So four rabbis go up to heaven. I don't remember all 4 rabbis' names. I believe Rabbi Akiva is one of them. He's the only one that comes back sane from the experience. One dies, one becomes a heretic, and one becomes insane. So, and Rabbi Akiva comes back fine. So one becomes a heretic as Elisha ben Abuya. So that's two stories now of Elisha ben Abuya coming into contact with God, either in that story of going up to heaven and seeing God in Pardes, which Pardes is Hebrew for orchard. The English word paradise comes from the word Pardes, which is, I think, a Persian word anyway. So Elisha ben Abuya goes up to Pardes with these three other rabbis and have an experience up there, an awesome spiritual religious experience in God's presence, and he becomes a heretic from that. Or he becomes a heretic from seeing a boy die from fulfilling a mitzvah, when you're not supposed to die from, in fact, have the opposite. You're supposed to live a long life from fulfilling that mitzvah. And he has this experience of hearing God speak to him or say his name. He hears God say his name on Yom Kippur. So the only person who really we hear from on Yom Kippur is the high priest, when he comes out of the Holy of Holies and says God's name, the Yud He Vav He, and pronounces it in the way that it should be pronounced. So, what do we make of this story? Now that we have this background of who Elisha ben Abuya is, if he is a heretic, why are the rabbis keeping him in the text? And why are the rabbis telling stories about him? If he's a heretic, you're supposed to erase somebody, a heretic, from your religious tradition. Why are the rabbis maintaining Elisha ben Abuya in the religious tradition? Any thoughts about that? Yes, David.
The only thing I could comment is that he becomes a heretic because God directs him to become a heretic.
Okay, so he becomes a heretic because God directs him to be a heretic. How so?
Well, when he hears this small little voice, it tells him not to repent.
Okay.
And if he went up to heaven and saw God, he came back with a message to that effect.
So either from the story in which, this story in Ruth Calderon's book, in which God says he's not accepting him back, so he has no choice but to be a heretic, or from his experience in heaven itself. Now, God did not tell him. God did not speak to those four rabbis. It's just how those rabbis reacted to that experience. They all reacted in different ways. Akiva is the only one who is able to handle it and come back sane. Elisha ben Abuya comes back a heretic. It's not that God... But I think it gets to the bigger point. The rabbis are trying to explain Elisha ben Abuya's heresy. They want to, for some reason, they want to maintain his teachings possibly because he is Rabbi Meir's teacher. So Rabbi Meir is not a heretic. In fact, just the opposite. Rabbi Meir is the source of all rabbinic tradition. So the basis for which, the mainline normative way of understanding rabbinic tradition is through Rabbi Meir's understanding. So if we don't accept Elisha ben Abuya, then that means by extension we can't accept Rabbi Meir. Because how can a heretic have a normal student? That can't be. A heretic has a heretic for a student. So you have to make sense of that and accommodate that in some way. There must be something to Elisha ben Abuya. We still have to maintain him and his teachings, even though he himself became a heretic, because we have Rabbi Meir as a student of him. Okay, so that I think is a powerful statement that the Talmud makes about this, because other religious traditions, there are plenty of stories of other religious traditions in which the heretic is stoned, excommunicated. It happens in Judaism. Baruch Spinoza was excommunicated by the rabbis of Amsterdam for his so-called heresy of his philosophy or his theology, the idea of pantheism. Coming from Spinoza, pantheism is not Jewish, so how could Spinoza, a good Jew, be teaching pantheism? We have to excommunicate him from the Jewish community. So there are other heretics, Shabtai Tzvi, who who thought he was the Messiah, and people thought he was the Messiah, also excommunicated. So there are other heretics in Jewish tradition, plenty of heretics in other religious traditions, and you totally don't, well, I mean, there's no control over Jews today, the way Jews had control back 2,000 years ago over, the rabbis had control over other Jews back then. So nobody can tell us what to read or not to read. Mordechai Kaplan, a product of the seminary who founded Reconstructionist Judaism, his Siddur and other books were burned by the Orthodox at the time in the 1920s. So again, nobody can prevent us from reading this stuff today, but if it was in their control, they would have prevented people from reading Spinoza, from reading Shabtai Tzvi, from reading Mordechai Kaplan. Okay? And they should have prevented them, people from reading Elisha ben Abuya, but they didn't. So I think that is a powerful statement, that it doesn't matter what you end up. If your teachings make sense, you can still study the teachings. And maybe the story also personalizes Elisha ben Abuya to say that even though he's a heretic, he's not a bad guy. He's still sensitive and appreciative of people, even his student, for following Jewish law. Barbara.
But it also, when bad things happen with, like, for no reason, or fears, why is this happening to me? And you behave, I'm not going to do this anymore or that anymore. It's also saying, be a little bit sympathetic, and although they are still violating, don't write them off.
Okay, so Barbara is suggesting also that even though Elisha ben Abuya became a heretic because of not understanding God's actions in this world, that by maintaining the story, the rabbis are saying we're not supposed to write such people off. Because there are a lot of people who have problems and are challenged by this traditional understanding of God's role in the world today. So that, the traditional understanding, and the rabbis themselves, as comes from the rabbis in the Mishnah and especially in the Talmud, the idea that God is all-powerful and transcendent, meaning living above us and present above us in the heaven. But God also, because God is all-powerful, God is also immanent, meaning involved in our lives today, right here in this room today, right with us right now. So God is both here with us right now, and God is also up in the heavens. So only God can be both. But for the rabbis, God also determines our actions. Because God is all-powerful, God can do that. So God knows, now today, God knows what every one of the nearly 8 billion people in the world are going to do every single moment. So that begs the question that traditionally then, if God knows what we are going to do, then basically we don't have any control over our actions. We're basically just following a script. But the rabbis say, no, we're not just following a script. So we do have some control over our lives, and that is if we follow the mitzvot. Or if we don't follow the mitzvot, but we repent. If we repent of our wrongful actions with sincerity, then we have control. That's what the whole Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur liturgy is about. That's the traditional liturgy. God's in control of everything. God determines what happens in the world around us, but we have a little bit of sense of control over that. But then what happens? If we have repented, or if we have been good, so good, and it passes independent inspection by other people that we are good people, and we are good people, and still bad things are happening to us, how do we make sense of that? Like this boy, an innocent boy, because he's not bar mitzvah age yet, he doesn't have responsibility for his actions. So he can't have done anything wrong to deserve to die after clearing the mother bird from the nest and taking the eggs. Why did he die then? Why do bad things happen to good people? Which can also be a question. Why do good things happen to bad people? But the real question is, why do bad things happen to good people? That is the theological question that all religions have to deal with. So the rabbis answer, it's beyond us. Good people can handle the bad things that happen to them, and they are loving assurances by God to tell us we can handle this. So don't think that we're being punished by God. Think instead God loves us because God knows we can handle it, and God wouldn't give us more than we can handle. So when bad things happen to good people, it's because good people can handle it. But if bad things were to happen to bad people, that doesn't happen because bad people will become heretics or will turn away from God, and God doesn't want that to happen, which is why bad things don't happen to bad people, but bad things happen to good people. Okay, so that is rabbis answering their own question, why are bad things happening to us as rabbis? Why are bad things happening to us as a Jewish community? Why is the temple being destroyed? Why are Romans persecuting us and oppressing us? Because we can handle it. God can't. We might deserve some of it. We don't deserve all of it, but we can handle it because we're good and God loves us. Yes, David, and then Peggy.
It ties into because the preaching was based on Job.
Right. Okay, very good. So, David, also, the story, intentionally, because, the story, it's unclear if the story really happened. Like all stories in the Talmud, they are not real stories. So since they are made up to teach a point, so yes, good point, Job. So what happens to Job? So Job, okay, so, excellent. Thank you for bringing that up. I'll get to your question in a couple of minutes, Peggy. So yes, why is Job here? So Job is here because he's the ultimate example of bad things happening to good people. Because the story of Job in the Bible is all about God and Satan, the advocate angel. Okay, not the devil, but the angel whose job it is to argue with God. Okay, so becomes in modern parlance the devil's advocate. So that's Satan in the Bible. Okay, so he's not the devil. He's just this angel that always argues with God. So they have a challenge. Satan says, I bet I can find somebody, even the best person in the world, who's going to turn against you if you just let me do it. And God said, okay, see what you can do. Here's Job. He's the best person in the world. So Job's family, except for his wife, all die. All his kids die, and he loses all his property and becomes impoverished. He's the wealthiest man in the world. He goes from the wealthiest man in the world to the poorest man in the world, and he's afflicted with boils. Itchy, painful boils, but he still has his wife. And then the whole book is three so-called friends arguing with him, saying, you must have done something wrong, Job, to deserve this. And Job insisting, no, I didn't do anything wrong. And then he arguing with God. Why are you doing this to me, God? And God says, who are you to ask me what I'm doing? Do you know when the animals are going to give birth? Do you know when the seasons are going to change and storms are coming, etc., etc.? And then Job passes the test. Yes, God, you are great. And then Job gets kids back, gets his wealth back sevenfold. So that is a total opposite of Elisha. So Meir quotes Job to try to possibly convince Elisha. Look at Job. Remember Job. He should have been a heretic. He had reason to be a heretic. You only saw somebody who's not even related to you die. Job has people in his family who die. You only saw one kid die. Job sees all these people die. And he loses his wealth too. And look at him. He didn't become a heretic. But how come you became a heretic? He's basically saying, by quoting Job. And by not becoming a heretic, he also gets rewarded after being punished. If you only came back, Elisha, look how much you could be rewarded too. Right? So that should be what the rabbis mean by having Meir quote Job to Elisha. And Elisha says, sorry, can't have it because God told me I can't, that God doesn't want me. So that is so Peggy, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, say what is so bad that you say that something is good and something is bad? Is it bad not to follow the rules of and commandments? Is it bad not to follow the rules of the mitzvot or something?
Right.
And the other question is, most people who have deep faith, when you say, why did this happen? They said, when the Mashiach comes, all will be answered. Right.
Okay, so bad, Peggy is saying, who defines bad? And some people say, well, when the Mashiach comes, we'll know all the answers to these challenges, these religious challenges that we have. Yes, so bad is based on the system by which we are living. Okay? So Jewish people define bad one way. Christians, Hindus define bad in different ways. So it's the system of morality by which you're living and guiding your life that determines what's good and what's bad. Okay? And if you can no longer abide by that system because something has happened in your life that it just doesn't make sense according to the rules of this system, then you got to leave the system at some point. Okay? So that's what happened to Elisha. Elisha's understanding of good and bad is that if you're going to chase away the mother bird to get the eggs, you're not supposed to die. And if you die when you do that, well, then I can't handle this system anymore. I have to leave the system. Okay? And so what becomes a challenge then to the system is how to accommodate challenges to the system. Okay? So the challenge to the Jewish system is the Holocaust. How do you accommodate the Holocaust? So Holocaust survivors, either as a result of living through the Holocaust, have become heretics, or have become, still are good Jews. How can a Holocaust survivor who has lived through the concentration camp still be a good Jew? I have no idea. But somehow there is such intense love for the system and intense devotion to God that has enabled them to withstand such trauma in their life. So I don't know. It takes a remarkable person and an incredibly religious person to be able to live through that based on their definition of what Judaism says to answer the problem of good and evil. Okay? So some people can handle it, some people cannot. And so or Judaism has to accommodate a variety of answers to the question. So there is one traditional answer, and there are other acceptable Jewish answers today for why good things happen to why bad things happen to good people. Okay? So you have Harold Kushner's book, and you have Reconstructionist Judaism that understands God in a particular way, and you have a variety of understandings of God and God's role in the world and in the universe, and whether God is immanent or God is not immanent and only transcendent. And how do we understand that? But then how we understand that also impacts how we understand doing Jewish things. And if we feel commanded to do Jewish things, what does that mean to feel commanded? Because if you're feeling commanded to do something Jewish, then you're feeling that God's talking to you. And God is immanent. So if you're feeling that, then how does that reconcile with other things that are going on? It's very complicated, and it is definitely very challenging. And that's, I think, what the rabbis are trying to tell us by keeping the story here. That even though they might have one answer, objective answer to why bad things happen to good people, it doesn't always work. And so Elisha ben Abuya is an example of when it doesn't work. But we're going to keep his story here because to know that, yes, we might even be prompted when something bad happens to us to be like Elisha ben Abuya. And yeah, at some points we might call you Acher. We might call you the other one. Or at some points, not just to be called the other, to feel like the other. You feel like you're outside the system. But like Barbara is saying, we're not writing you off. You're still part of the community, and we want to work with you. Even the great Rabbi Meir, the Mishnah embodied in Rabbi Meir, even he is willing to talk to Elisha ben Abuya and still consider him his teacher, even though he's a heretic. And so that by having Meir talk, by having the Mishnah talk to Elisha, he's teaching us, no, we, the Mishnah, the rabbis, are not going to write off heretics. We're going to work with them and try to keep them as part of the community. So I think that, for me, this is one of the most powerful stories in the Talmud, because it talks about the idea that though the rabbis might be teaching a particular approach to Judaism, it doesn't mean that it is the only approach. They maintain minority and majority opinions in the Talmud. We study both opinions, and even heretical opinions and are maintained in the Talmud as well. For us to study that, to try to learn how to deal with such challenging issues in our lives today, and to ensure that that when people are so challenged that they feel that they can come to somebody to seek answers for it. So any other thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay.
But saying it a different way, I got this out of the commentary of Calderon.
Yeah.
He's a heretic, but he's the village accepted heretic. He rides along the shul so that he'll be seen by the
Right.
Jews in the shul.
Right. He's the village accepted heretic. Right.
In the
yes.
end, I think what Judaism is doing here, the Mishnah is accepting kind of the psychological chaos. Elisha can't accept the good straight way because God told him, he heard a voice, and he saw what happened to the little boy. And there's evil in the world that's unexplained, and there's a kind of psychological chaos, part of the human condition, and you got to deal with it, but you don't exclude the person who doesn't, because we all feel that chaos and those doubts. So you keep them Jewish,
right?
Keep them tithing, but
so Joe is just reiterating what I was saying in a slightly different way, just calling it psychological chaos. And, the fact that he is still riding on a horse on Shabbos, he's still in town. And certainly the story could have been written that the people were throwing stones at him, and Rabbi Meir had to come out and stop people from throwing stones. They weren't throwing stones at him. They're saying, your teacher's outside. You're not just your teacher, your rabbi is outside. Okay, so the people, out of respect for Meir, respect Elisha. Because maybe Elisha had just given sermons a couple years before in the very same spot that Rabbi Meir is giving sermons. And they liked his sermons. And then he became a heretic. Okay, so something happened. Something popped in Elisha, and something's going to pop in all of us, maybe. And maybe something pops a lot of times in our lives. And so instead of becoming a heretic, or even if we become a heretic, we could still feel Jewish, or we could still feel part of the Jewish community. So Elisha ben Abuya is not totally lost. He still knows what the 2,000 cubits are. He still knows that what he's doing publicly is wrong, but he just has to do that because he's not part of the system anymore, but he still respects the system and remembers that what power it had for him before, and maybe he feels sorry. I mean, the fact that he heard that still small voice. Imagine. So like I said before, how rare is it to hear that still small voice? And then, so to be able to hear it, and then the voice is saying, you're out. There's no hope for you. Okay, so that's so bizarre. How can you be hearing that voice? You're one of few people in the world who can hear the voice. But the voice is saying, no, there's no hope for you. So that is so theologically powerful and complex that it just to know. So you can feel you could feel so arrogant because you could be a prophet because you hear this voice. But then no, you're shot down right away because no, not you. There's no hope for you. So it's just bizarre, and the fact that the rabbis are writing the story in this way, that even a heretic can hear God's voice. Even a heretic can hear God's voice. Yeah.
Everything is relative. To some other Jews, we're heretics.
Okay, yeah, so Peggy is saying to some other Jews we're heretics. That's not the point of this story. But I would say the point, so to apply this today, is that the attitude that some in the community have to others in the community is wrong. An unaccepting attitude by some in the community of others is wrong. Whether it's the non-Orthodox looking down on the Orthodox and making fun of how strict the Orthodox are, or the Orthodox looking down on the non-Orthodox saying you're not really Jewish, that is not acceptable, because look at this story. So for the Orthodox, for the non-Orthodox is Elisha ben Abuya riding the horse. Right? So it doesn't matter. So let's play this out. So the non-Orthodox Jews in the community today are Elisha ben Abuya. The Orthodox are Rabbi Meir. So the way it should be is, now there's a story that the first chief rabbi of Palestine was Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook. And he sat down with both yeshiva students and kibbutzniks, secular kibbutzniks, and treated all with respect. So the Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook was like Rabbi Meir in this story. And however, there was a time in some ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods in Israel that they would stretch a piano wire across some streets so that if anybody were to dare ride a motorcycle through their neighborhood, the piano wire would be at the appropriate height so that the person riding on the motorcycle would be knocked off the motorcycle. So that's not exactly what this story is saying, right? The heretic is not supposed to be stoned or be cut down by a piano wire. The heretic is supposed to be allowed to walk through your neighborhood on Shabbat. And the heretic can even be your teacher. There could be something that we have to teach other people. All people have something to teach all people. We have to be open to it. So I think that's another beautiful aspect of this story too, that the heretic can still be the teacher. Because there is some knowledge that we have. Okay, so I wanted to end with this story on purpose because of the power that the story has. So it might not, when we picture Talmud, or picture rabbinic literature, we might picture a particular approach that is not open. And I wanted us to understand that the approach of the rabbis is a very open approach to all, and we can even find a basis for it in the Talmud itself. So have a good evening, everybody, and look forward to another class in a few weeks. I'm thinking about teaching a class, a 4-part class on 4 challenging sections of the Torah. So we'll see. I have to find 4 weeks in a row to be able to do that. Stay tuned.